Good evening and welcome. My name is Peter Wagner. They call me Whiskey Pete. I, by title, am the Whiskey Ambassador to Brown-Forman. Thank you for taking part in our tasting this evening. We have some fun whiskeys for you today. This evening we are trying 4 different selections from Old Forester. We are having 3 Whiskey Row series, and then we are sampling the Old Forester Statesman. What is Old Forester? Old Forester is actually what started the company Brown-Forman. As I mentioned earlier, I'm the Whiskey Ambassador to Brown-Forman, and it all started with Old Forester. This is the company that owns Jack Daniel's, Woodford, Old Forester, Early Times, Canadian Mist, Herradura and El Jimador tequilas, just to name a few. It all started back in 1870 with Old Forester. Old Forester is 72% corn, 18% rye, and the rest is barley. But it's more than that. Old Forester has one of the richest histories in all of bourbon. Started by George Garvin Brown, as I mentioned earlier, in 1870, Old Forester wasn't originally for social consumption. Believe it or not, it was originally used for medicinal use. There was no Pfizer in 1870. God forbid, if you got shot back in 1870, what they're going to do is they're going to pour some in the wound, hopefully twice as much in your mouth, and then they're going to pray for you. You just got shot in 1870. But here's the problem. Not all whiskey is made the same. Therefore, not all medicine is made the same. As a matter of fact, there was a lot of just kind of crazy things in the market at the time. What they would do is they would take those barrels of whiskey and they'd put them on a wagon. Take that wagon up north to the Ohio River. And then it was upward and onward. That's how, that was your expressway at the time. Now here's the problem. As it went along the path, everybody felt like they could have their way with those barrels. I'm going to ask you a question I've asked for the past 11 years to thousands of people. I got a feeling you're going to have the same answer. If you were in the hull of a boat by yourself with a bunch of barrels of whiskey, what would you do? You'd steal it, and that's what they did. The tool to get it out is called a thief for a reason. So by the time it got down south, out west, wherever it was going, more than the angels got their share. So the government in all their wisdom said, we've got an idea. What we're going to do is we're going to put scales along the path. Who would be able to get around that? If it weighs this much here and that much there, and then that much when it gets to the end, it's got to be the same thing. Nobody could get around that. Unless, of course, your parents had a liquor cabinet when you were younger. Think about it. You take a brown liquid out, all you have to do is put a brown liquid back in. You're standing on a boat on the Ohio River. The answer was literally under your feet. And that's what they did. People would take the whiskey out, they would put river water in, but then it didn't taste like whiskey, so they had to add other things. What would they add? I'm going to ask you to stop eating for a moment while I go over this. They used what was readily available for them. They would add chemicals, they would add the river water, they would add gunpowder, acids. Most prevalent item that they would use was dip spit. Think about that. You're sick, you're taking your medicine, half of it's river water, and some of it's dip spit. So clearly this created inconsistencies at the time. George Garvin hated hearing anything negative about his products. So what did he do? He made friends with a gentleman down the road who was mass-producing glass bottles, put all of his whiskeys in the glass bottles, making Old Forester the very first registered whiskey in the United States to be put into a bottle. Not only that, in 1920 when Prohibition came along, there were 9 distilleries that were allowed to make whiskey. Out of those 9, only 1 survived, and that's Old Forester. It is the only whiskey to be made before, during, and after straight through Prohibition. Old Forester, again, is 72% corn, 18% rye, and the rest is barley. At 18% rye, anything over 15 is considered high rye. That means it has spice. When we talk about grains, let's talk about bread. We talk about corn. Think about cornbread. It has a nice sweet profile to it. Wheat, if something has wheat in it, that's going to be a little bit drier and creamy. Cream of wheat. If it has barley, then it's going to have a nutty quality, and rye. Think about that deli sandwich. That's going to have spice. So 72% corn, 18% rye, the rest is barley. Now Now, not only is that the grain bill for Old Forester, it's the grain bill for the entire Whiskey Row series. They are all 72% corn, 18% rye, the rest barley. But what makes them different is the process. With the Whiskey Row series, Chris Morris is playing with the 5 sources of flavor, and he's altering them to pay homage to commemorative years in the history of Old Forester. Now, I'll say this, it's one thing to talk about it, but it's another thing to taste. Let's have a few sips. The first whiskey we're going to sample this evening is Old Forester 1870. What is 1870? 1870 pays homage to the original profile of Old Forester. When Old Forester was first released, again, for medicinal use, it was actually a blended whiskey. It was a marriage of barrels from 3 different distilleries. Now, we don't get paid to sell other people's whiskey. So Chris Morris is pulling all of the whiskey for this bottle from 3 very distinct warehouses. Let's go ahead and take a sip and see what we get. This is a fun one. If you're looking to get into Old Forester, this is the perfect whiskey for you. With this one, I get softer profiles. Even at 18% rye, this one is a lot softer on the palate. But let's see how it goes. First, before we sample, I want to smell this. Now, if you've never done a sampling before, when you smell whiskey, you're going to want to hold it about this far away from your nose. These are high-proof alcohols, so if you do get too close, you could burn your palate out. Sidebar, if for some reason you do burn your palate, just sniff the back of your hand. Believe it or not, your own scent will neutralize your palate and allow you to get back to those delicious profiles. So we're going to hold it about this far away from our nose, purse our lips, open our lips, and breathe in. About 60% of what you taste comes through your nose. You want to hold it about this far away from your nose and breathe in. The first smells that you're going to get are what we call the feminine profiles. Those are your fruit floral notes. Those come from the yeast strain, and then the baking spices, your vanillas, your caramels. That comes from the barrel. Brown-Forman is the only whiskey company that makes their own barrels. 100% of the colors, 60-70% of the flavor comes from the barrel. We're the only ones that do it. But when we make our barrels, first we toast them using ultraviolet heat, caramelizing all the sugars, and then we char it to open up those pores. And this one, we get a lot of those baking spices. As I smell this, I get stone fruit. I get cherry, jammy notes. Your obvious caramels, vanillas, things like that. Let's take a sip. And there it is. Being a high rye, we still get that rye spice on it, but lots of jammy notes. That cherry is coming through. Tropical fruit notes. The caramels, the vanillas. What do you get? Our next whiskey is Old Forester 1897. What is 1897? 1897 is our Bottle and Bond. Back in 1897, the U.S. government instituted the Bottle and Bond Act. What is that? That's the government's real first laws that pertain to food and liquor. Remember earlier how I was talking about how everyone was adding to their whiskeys? Well, not only did George Garvin not like that, the government didn't like it. So they instituted the Bottle and Bond Act of 1897. With this, it stated that your whiskey had to be aged in a bonded warehouse from one distillery, one distiller, one distilling season, and had to be aged for a minimum of 4 years. All of that product had to come out at 100 proof. Again, I could talk about it all day, but that's not half as fun as tasting. On the nose, I'm getting spice. That rye is coming forward. It sits up front. Again, this is the same percentage of the same grains, just different application. Grain notes. Slight sweetness, but it's just all about the spice. Let's take a sip. And there it is. Black pepper right on the front. Rye spice. goes into those sharper, grainy notes. This would be perfect for making cocktails. Sidebar, a properly made drink is sweet, spicy, and bitter. If you balance it nicely, you can have 3 or 4. However, if you are mixing sweet on sweet, you're going to sour your belly. You may be brand loyal to that sweeter whiskey, but sweet on sweet, you'll have 1, maybe 2, and then you're done. 1 and done, that's not fun. Let's have another sip. Our third whiskey this evening is Old Forester 1910. Back in 1910, there was a fire in the Brown-Forman warehouses that threatened all of our stock. With quick thinking, the staff took all of the product out of the barrels and went ahead and put it into a large vat while they put out the fire. When they were done, they were able to re-barrel everything. Sidebar, as you age whiskey in a barrel, a few things happen. You have extraction. When the weather gets warm, the pores open up and the whiskey soaks in. When the weather gets cool, it tightens up and shoots it back. American whiskeys get 100% of the color, 60 to 70% of the flavor from the barrel. Again, we're the only ones that make our own. Not only do you have the extraction, you have concentration. Every year, we lose a certain percentage to evaporation. Romantically, we call that the angel's share. But what's actually happening is the water is finding its way out of that barrel, creating a more full-bodied, higher-proof whiskey. Third, oxidation. As those barrels breathe in and out, the sugars will break down. They interact with the oxygen, making a softer profile. This is not unlike pouring red wine into a decanter or through one of those fancy oxidizers. So after the fire, they took all that gorgeous whiskey and they put it back into new barrels. Barrel's a lot like a tea bag. Have you ever tried to make tea with 2 tea bags? You're going to get this big, bold profile. With the whiskey, you're getting all the tannins from 2 barrels, and that's what 1910 is. 1910 is Old Forester in 2 different barrels. It's going to have a lot of oak notes to it for people who just love that barrel profile. Let's take a nose, take a taste. A lot of those familiar Old Forester profiles are coming through here. The vanillas, the caramels, we've got those. We know that. Bit of honey. It's there. Let's take a taste. Wood. Oak. I'm getting cedar. The smell and the palate remind me of my mother's cedar closet. You're getting a lot of those tannins. It has a slight grip to the tongue. Bit of that rye coming through, bit of spice, but now it's hitting me in the back of the throat. Let's see what you get. Last bottle, Old Forester Statesman. Now you'll notice there's no age statement on this one. There's no date on this one. That's because technically this is not part of the Whiskey Row series. It did come out right in the middle of our releasing of the Whiskey Row, but this is something different. What is Old Forester Statesman? Believe it or not, it's a character in a movie. A few years ago, a fun movie came out called The Kingsman. In this movie, a young soccer hooligan is reformed into becoming a spy. These spies are all disguised as tailors. Well, in the sequel, the spies come to the States and they find a new group of spies called the Statesmen. Now, we're not necessarily known for our tailors here in the States, but what they were good at is making whiskey. A group of spies disguised as distillers, and the whiskey they make is Statesman. Now that posed a special challenge to Chris Morris. He had to come up with a version of Old Forester that embodied that term, statesman. How do you do that? Well, the first thing that he did is, as he gathered barrels for this product, he pulled the barrels that exhibited mostly the masculine profiles, like a true statesman. He then went through and found barrels that had oxidized. They were softer on the palate, more approachable, bold and smooth statesman. A good story is a good story, but a great whiskey is divine. Let's go ahead and try this one. On the nose, I get leather. I get tobacco. I get clove. Spices. Let's try. Now, this one is smooth, but not like the 1870. The 1870 had those dark fruit, those pitted fruit notes, those cherry, plum, prune profiles to it. This one, it's caramel smooth. It's soft, it's approachable, but it lingers on the palate. And the longer it sits there, those tobacco notes, those heartier notes come through. What do you think? Ladies and gentlemen, that's been your tasting. I'm Whiskey Pete. I want to thank you so much for taking part in our tasting this evening. On behalf of myself and the Corkscew, be safe, be healthy, don't touch your face, wash your hands. Cheers.